All right, folks, we're on the record. Again, as my style is, I don't typically have agendas for the reason of flexibility. And then our meetings can oftentimes, good morning, Lucinda.
Good morning.
Our meetings can oftentimes, move to topics that if you want to intercede, what I'm saying is it's okay to interrupt. If it gets out of hand, then we'll go back to writing. Typically, our committees are a little smaller than this, so if it gets to be offensive where somebody's just butting in, we would want to be cautious on that. There was supposed to be two topics that we were going to discuss. One of them was the AFD budget's actual, as well as we were going to dabble into the MLNP dividend discussion. However, the MLNP dividend discussion is going to be moved to Friday with Jennifer Johnson taking over that. So in that capacity, let's maybe just, we're on the record. This one was a reasonable one to record, so we're on the record now. If you guys, hey George,
Would you like
do you guys just want to sit up front here and then we'll do introductions if you don't mind?
I was just checking.
No, we're here. Go ahead, Chief.
Yes, sir.
She wants to get introductions.
We're on the record. Just
Oh, I'm
introduce
sorry.
yourself.
Chris Bashu, Anchor Fire Department.
George McGillis.
Lucinda Mahoney. Marilyn Monzo.
Tim Scale.
Paul Owen. Adam Trombley. Ernie Hall.
Amy Demboski.
Big training.
That'll be great, Jack.
Bill Starr.
Patrick Cliff.
And I do sit as chair of the Assembly Budget and Finance Committee. That role is just kind of to facilitate information flow. We typically don't vote, we don't take action, and I try to stay away from recommendations on items in front of us. That'll drift into a discussion as it relates. We do have an item in front of us, an administration request to expand last year's spending of AFD's approved budget to somewhere around a $1.7 million increase over actual approved budget. In that capacity, I don't want to talk too much about that, except as it relates to what we may need to do first quarter. In first quarter, spending is always an interesting deal because it relates to how we set the taxes. So that segue leads into a couple of things. I've got numbers here that are somewhat challenging for us to get our arms around. More importantly, to prevent perhaps a train wreck if that's what's going to happen this year. I don't know that our budget discussed, especially the 2014 approved budget, I don't know if it discussed the levels of overtime that we're seeing. If it did, perhaps we don't have to discuss it, but typically our budgets are built on last year's modeling and we move into that. So I'm a little bit startled by a couple numbers. One is the increased overtime spending that we saw the budget actuals give us, and that was somewhere about $2 million of budget number. Chief, without answering a lot of questions, is there one or two factors that's driving that number higher than we anticipated?
I'll throw out there one that may be a key phrase is where we base our 2013 budget on our 2012 numbers. And if you just did that and you didn't look at anything else, you would say, well, what did the fire department spend in 2012? You know, we're in the ballpark. The problem is in 2012 I had 10 additional people. And that 10 additional people makes a huge difference in how much overtime I have to expend. So that might be one factor. The other factor would be is that if you miss that on 2012, if you just look broadly over the last 3 to 4 years, you're going to see fairly consistent overtime number, basically in the neighborhood of what it is now, $4 million.
Listen, I thought there was 2 reports. Do you have the second one? This should have gone around. The 2013 actual versus budget, I just kind of got this as well. Where's the actual versus budgeted overtime for 2013?
It's actually not, what we did was we collapsed it for labor in total.
All right.
And so I can tell you what those numbers are. For 2013, the actuals for overtime were 4.7, and the budget was 2.7.
for 2013.
2013, and the budget for overtime for 2014 is 2.4.
Go ahead, Paul.
And I think it was Trumbull that had me.
Yeah, what I saw was another report that also had the total department cost as well, where we had the 86 million. That's not, I don't have that report. Did you send it out?
That is the long report, okay? This report
Oh, I see.
identifies all the trends for the significant accounts back to 2008.
Right.
And labor is at the top, but like I said, we busted out the details of labor on a separate page.
Yeah, it
That
just
was
looked
the
different on my
focus.
screen, so this is the report I was looking at. So can you guide the body to that number which you just spoke about on the budget final for overtime? Where is that?
Actually, it's not reported on either of these, okay?
All right, so we're gonna have to
We
just,
have another piece of paper if somebody wants to make.
No, that's- I get it.
We can distribute it.
all right. Yeah, 2014 budgeted OT is what?
2.4.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Adam.
So I did some research, Chief, and tender 9, which ended up staying in service year-round, was about $500,000 in total cost, which I'm assuming goes to somewhat of the overtime. And then you said 10. I showed, in 2012, we had 380 reps and non-reps in the department. 2013, 374. I mean, it's splitting hairs, but we had from my understanding, we lost about 13 to 15 through attrition, 13, and then we had an academy, we brought in 11, am I correct? So that's somewhat of a net wash to some degree. But the overtime increased roughly 40%. Let's assume that your numbers are 10 different. Does the reduction in 10 in staffing equate to a 40% increase in overtime? It seems to be a dramatic increase for just 10 people.
So we had our what you said is correct, we had our minimum staffing, and then on top of that, we had 10 additional people. So those 10 additional people are what really help with the overtime. There are other overtime factors in there. One is leave use. It goes up a little bit every year. The other one and I've got some graphs I can show you on this. The other one that's a real factor is between FEMLA, AFLA, military leave, et cetera, from basically in 2013, from January 1 to December 31st, I had 12 fewer people. They were on our books, they were employees, but they were not filling a seat. And that's in addition to people who just take a day off, that's in addition to people who call in sick for the day. Those sorts of factors are really.
You know, Lucinda, is that on this other summary report, some of the factors that the chief just named? I don't see that supported here, Chief, in the annual leave requests. And that's up about 50,000. Sick leave up 20. Am I missing it somewhere else?
I don't think it's shown on there, though.
No.
It's not shown on that report that you have.
Then name the factors again, because FSL leave overtime is listed on the report I have.
I can show you in the information that I have, if I can just pass those out.
Lucinda, this sheet right here,
Right.
that we all have, the third block down talks about just under holiday pay. Your account 1201, FSLA overtime, callback OT, OT a premium, and on down the list. Is that not what the chief's referencing?
I'm not sure, I don't know what his documents reflect, but
Sure.
these are the actual codes that reflect overtime that, is managed by the department.
I see.
The reason why there becomes confusion is because the PeopleSoft reports, some incorporate holiday and leave cash in
Okay.
the numbers. And so if you don't know to take those out of PeopleSoft, you can get inaccurate data. And so Marilyn, our ACE reporter, knows that, and so
Okay.
she's the one
Well,
that
and
developed.
Chief, we will take what you have. I guess the discussion, what I would rather see is factoring what's driving the overtime, which is what you're starting to tell us, And Adam's moving in towards a discussion about a solution perhaps as well. So if we can continue to spend some more time with questions from the body here on what's driving it as it substantiates with real numbers. If you can send us out what you have, because I can go on these and they don't substantiate that we've got a huge trend in that. FSLA is only up 10,000 over 12 to 13. Everyone kind of see which report I'm on here, this one? About halfway down is what the chief's emphasizing.
The thing to note too is when you're looking at this report was a trend report.
I understand.
And so it doesn't reflect 2013 budget to actuals, okay? And so, for example, when you look at annual leave cash-in, the number right underneath overtime,
Sure.
the budget was 2.5 million. They came in at 2.1 million, which was still significantly higher than the previous year.
Yes.
So you would think that that would drive it up, but it didn't drive up the variance because the budget was in fact higher.
Right. Paul, go ahead.
Well, I guess the primary question I would ask, going off of just this report with the grayscale, is, and I heard you say, maybe Ms. Mahoney or Ms. Chief, 2.4 million was what was budgeted for overtime in 2013, correct?
No, that is in 14.
Okay, I'm sorry. 13.
In 13, there's probably a little bit of potential for confusion in that we had budgeted 2.4 million for operational overtime.
Okay.
We put in an additional 300,000 to cover the cost of the academy, which was spent solely on the academy. So yes, it was 2.7, what you may show in the budget, but 2.4 is really what is the operations portion of the overtime.
And yet it shows, to follow up with that, it shows that the total was 4.7.
Yes.
So my question is, how do we get such a huge gap between 2.7 on the high end and 4.7? Where does that factor come from? And I think that's the key.
Okay, that's the key point, and the key point there is, I have that 97 seats that I have to fill every day. The fire department is, to my knowledge, the only department that has minimum staffing. So every day, I have to fill 97 seats. And anytime I drop below having 97 personnel, I've only got two options. I fill it with overtime, or I close. There's not an option C. If I'm down personnel, I pay that overtime or I close. Bottom line is, why we're here now is I've been paying that overtime to keep equipment rolling. That's what it comes down to. And there's no, there's not really another option. And we knew January 1, we were gonna be in this predicament. That's why we started taking action January 1.
My follow-up to that?
Yeah, go ahead, because I want to factor in the question about the academy and what we staffed for.
And I want to go back briefly, previous years, I don't see 2.7 all but 2009. Well, I'll go back to 2008. Since 2009, every year, it's been much higher than 2.7. That's at the high end. So
It's
why is our
averaged
projections?
over the last year about $4 million.
Right. So why wasn't it 3 million or 3.5 million as a projection in the previous budget years? And that way we can get closer to the actuals. And maybe that's perhaps a question of the administration, perhaps the mayor, I don't know.
Well, can I zoom out on that for a second here?
Yeah,
Mr.
go
Chairman?
ahead.
So, listen, I sent you an email last week asking about where we are related to the budget, or to the tax cap. We're, I think, 2.2 million under, going to 14. So, question one is, we over-collected last year based on, what, in 13. But, 13 budget was the basis for 14 calculations. Is this increase, presuming it gets approved for 13, going to increase the 13 base budget?
No, it would just be, it would be a supplemental. And the budget, is what it is. But I think where you're going with this is what is the impact to the 2014 budget?
No, 2014 cap.
Oh, okay, yeah, so I can answer that.
Okay.
So, based on a back-of-the-envelope analysis, if the fire department manages the same way it did in 2013, in 2014, and we have a 2.3% wage and health benefit increase. That would equate to $1.5 million higher than 2013. Then when you, and that would be 65.6 million for labor. Then when you look at our budget for 2014, it's 63.6, which equates to a $2 million approximate increase in 2014 to fund the fire department the same way that it was managed in 2013. That would put us approximately $200,000 under the cap, assuming no other changes.
Can you repeat that? How much under the cap?
200,000. And I am really roughly estimating this because the increase for the 2.3% doesn't apply to non-reps, they're 1.5. So there's gonna be a little delta.
But you're parsing here, you're presuming the fire department's cap is a separate cap from the overall municipality. Is that?
No, I'm looking at it in total for the 5 major funds.
So, here's my concern, and it's twofold. One, we have budgeted a lower overtime number for 14 than we did for 13, and 13 overran. And you don't expect, you told me our budget for overtime is 2.4 million for 14. We budgeted 2.7 for 13. We overran by 2 million in 13. If we get anywhere near that in 14,
That's the problem.
then we've basically burned the tax capacity of the municipality just like that.
That's why we're
what I
meeting.
just said.
Okay, but here's the second part of that, okay? And this is, I apologize for the.
No, do it, Patrick, you're fine, keep going.
You know, and this is the reason for this, I use the phrase zoom out. The current proposal in front of the legislature for the A student allocation for the school district would require a local match. And it's a pretty conservative number right now in terms of how much it would increase the base student allocation. I wouldn't be surprised if that rose in the months ahead. It would require a local match of $1.6 million.
It's a problem.
And
Okay,
that's on the
what that
conservative
means,
side.
no, what that means, okay, we have other things going on too, okay? So if that's the case, and then we have 2 million here, that's, 3.6. There is also a bill by Representative Stoltz to reduce our auto tax by $6 million. Okay, so there are other things in the mix right now that could have a significant impact on our go forward.
With the auto tax could be dealt with by increasing the mill levy. That doesn't hurt us from a tax cap perspective. I'm just thinking in practical terms, how do we come up with the dollars we need to operate the city?
That's a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
And that's the focus of what we do. If it was immediately where we could just say, well, let's just increase your budget, we would do that, but you've got to match it up with a revenue source. And the idea of being proactive between now and then is to bring sort of everybody in the queue, because we likely will have a conversation with the police department that goes not dissimilar to this one.
So here,
Go ahead.
My final point is, or request is, let's go back and look at this in a slightly different light, in that, because we over-collected in 13, that, goes into fund balance and becomes a reason we collect less in 14, and Bill and I had this conversation that.
Well, we don't do it intentionally, it just happens.
It happens.
Yeah.
And so my.
I'd rather give it back.
I know.
Yeah.
We've had a discussion. But given that, it would be, I think, helpful to us as we just try to manage finances of the municipality, if we could figure out a way for this sort of essentially retroactive budget increase to affect the 2013 budget in a manner that gives us flexibility, increased capacity under the cap, so that we can figure it out. And I know it's a little
We've
challenging.
never done that before, Patrick.
I know, but we're in a rough spot right now.
Which I'm not trying to put Lucinda on the hook. We've tried to get those budget to actual reports to close the gap quickly. We did this once before. You and I increased this budget on the Goodrich watch sometime back, but we did it the 20th of December, and it accomplished what you needed to.
So can I clarify the question?
Yes,
So I think
let's
that-
bring it back to the fire department if you
And I
can.
apologize for the
Yeah.
zoom out. That bigger picture has been concerning.
Right, but I think what I hear you saying though is you're trying to figure out if we can go back and adjust the tax cap upward. so that there's more capacity. Is that what I hear you saying?
Since this affects 2013, yes.
Right. And I don't think that we can do that because of the way the tax cap formula works. Because the way the starting point is, you take the prior year, the amount that was levied.
Right, except that we did over-collect in 13. Therefore, there are dollars that are sort of unaccounted for.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
There is some of that trend, although I've got a 10-year report that shows we've consistently sort of gone like this. That 2 million is not the highest we've ever collected, so it's gonna come out in the fund balance wash as well, Patrick, so,
Just-
and I know where you're going with it, because I wanna get there too, but I wanna do it pragmatically with discussions about other things, and today it's to get the facts of the fire department.
And I apologize for the diversion, I just wanted to.
No, it was a helpful diversion, because it's where we need to be in an hour from now. Somebody had the floor, and then Mr. Trainee, I think. Go ahead.
Amy had something.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Amy.
Well, my question is, to the chief, what percentage of guys, or how many of the guys maximize their tour trades?
I don't know, and when you say maximize the tour trades.
Yeah, you
they're
allow what,
not-
13 a year?
Yeah, and I don't know how, we actually allow more than 13.
How many do you allow?
Essentially, it's unlimited as long as you don't hold a deficit of more than 13. In other words, I can work for you as much as you want me to, but I can't be 13 days, I can't owe you 13 days or vice versa. Does that make sense? So we can tour trade all we want if you and I are on the same schedule, and, but I can't work for you more than 13 days unless you start to pay me back. Does that make sense?
Well, I was gonna say, it probably makes a moot point, but I was thinking they were held to 13. And my thought is, if they're not using it for leave cash in, if they're just straight for tour trades, that might be an out-of-the-box way of encouraging some of the overtime to diminish and letting the guys, giving them the avenue. It's not costing the taxpayer any money, any more money. It's not overtime. But, my understanding is.
To increase it?
Yeah, I mean, because you're cutting out the overtime costs, but you're encouraging them to do tour trades, not for overtime, not for leave cash in, just straight old tour trades. And to some of these guys, it might be very attractive, and it's not gonna cost the taxpayer overtime.
Can you, while we're talking about that, this last thing I just passed out, if you go to the second page, this may be focusing in on what Amy's talking about. Chief, I did 10 copies, I didn't realize we were having a packed house, but this is a report that was generated to us when we had the conversation about the ladder truck and a few other things. So this last one that I just passed out, you're looking for a table that talks like this, if everyone can find it. Up here, the first page was AFD department-wide data. It was a packet of that. So this is actually a helpful report because I don't think it's changed all that much in terms of other staffing. Paul, it's got a lot of pages attached to it, and it starts out like this. Go to the second page. We're all there. Chief, are you seeing what I'm seeing?
Yes.
Okay, so the 97.
And it hasn't, essentially it's identical.
Yeah, so the 97 at the bottom of engine, truck, and medic is looking to be your minimum staffing level, as you call it with the 97. Is Amy talking about the 89 number above in terms of the flexibility to rotate that staff, the plus 24 rotating fire positions?
No.
What is she talking about?
She's saying, we still have 97, but it doesn't matter who's working that 97.
I see.
Because a tour trade is essentially a wash. You work for me, I work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Is all I know is that I need 97, and I don't particularly care if it's you or I that are working it.
But a guy on overtime is not really motivated to stay home then, because he knows that if he's gonna go into trade, then he's gonna perhaps give away that time and a half incentive. But, I mean, I'm not trying to talk about a derogatory term, but if he's OT'd and he's on that calendar, hey, I'm going in, it's Saturday, I'm gonna make double time or overtime. Is that a motivator for the guys to keep going and not trade?
If I understand the question, no. Tour trades, the easiest way to look at them is as a non-cost item. If I'm short people, then I'm gonna have to call somebody in, and tour trades really don't factor into that.
And I don't wanna revisit all of this discussion as it goes back into the ladder truck or some of the other stuff that was that. In terms of total personnel, folks, one of the proposals from the mayor, and we built Plan A, Plan B, not everybody was here, so I don't wanna resurrect it again, but in terms of he was proposing perhaps an alternate minimum staffing that brought in the 3 versus 4 person pack requirements for that. In the Matrix report dabbled in that area as well. You're not engaging in reducing the staff to 3 or 4, so you're still maintaining the 97 number when it presents itself. So that's still a 4-person pack.
There are 8
Yes.
mandatory 4-packs, and it essentially is contractual
By the labor contract.
by the labor contract. So
Yeah.
if I said tomorrow, no, we're just gonna staff with 3, that would save me almost $3.5 million. But,
Mhm.
you know, that's fantasy, I can't.
Well, sometimes they staff with 3 anyhow.
Yes, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess it's mostly so when that decision is made, and I've stopped into my station, particularly watching the ladder truck and its dispatching frequencies and all that stuff, so it's really not about the ladder truck, it's about how many guys are in that station, in some, the way I see it from the
Yeah,
outside
sure.
looking in. When they drop to the number that's not 11, down to 9, who decides that? How does that happen?
If we said we're not gonna staff those companies, then that would be my decision.
And you don't close the station typically, for example, when Eagle River goes to 9, you obviously don't
No.
shut it down.
No, it would still be open, they would just run with 2 fewer people out there.
Is it unsafe, chief?
Except for that's made up someplace else, because he still has to maintain 8 people, I'm sorry, 4 people on 8 apparatus.
Yes.
Okay, so those 4 people, if he decides that it's not gonna be, that apparatus is not gonna have 4 in station 11, he has to make it up in one of the other stations. He has the latitude to do that. In fact, they do that routinely to balance it so that at least they've got the right number of 8 for the right number of 4 times that 8 through every single day. But all the rest of the apparatus require 3, so that's the 3 pack minimum. And that report that you saw had a whole plethora
No, I know.
of how it was staffed.
Well, it's
throughout the
still
country.
accurate, this piece of data
Yes,
is, for
this
me,
is-
is accurate
this is.
in terms of minimum staffing level discussions, and I don't know how to address that today, but can you talk a little bit about how the academy affected and didn't affect your time off? Because it sounds to me, and Mr. Trombley brought it up, is that, you sort of had attrition. I didn't see the overtime report, or the attrition report. Ms. Mahoney, I asked for it this morning, but obviously,
We can't work that fast.
I get it, yeah.
So
So the people that quit were replaced by the academy. How does that factor in terms of where we're chasing, what we're chasing here is another group of people that are off on your workday that you don't have available to staff from. Meaning businessman in me says, hey, I've got, however many people on force, but for some reason, a block of them, 10 to 20% of them aren't available to work. Some of them they quit, some of them are just hurt, laid off, leave with their kids, vacation. Is that number bigger than it used to be?
It was actually smaller in 2013. So I had attrition of 14 people in 2011, 12 people.
Is that in this packet?
No, no, it's not, I'm sorry.
Okay, so go slow on that. So attrition was what?
14 people left, 14 firefighters left in 2011. 12 left I'm sorry, 13 left in 2012. And in 2013, I only had 7 leave.
Okay, so the academy, which we try to forward fund and be anticipatory of, how many did that bring you back up to then? So you were 7 down?
320. So that brought me up essentially my minimum staffing of 315 plus the extra.
So
Or, I'm sorry,
13,
325.
you added 13 at your academy?
Yes, well,
Turned out to be 13.
yeah, we added 13 people essentially above and beyond our minimum staffing. So we had a bigger academy of 13. We actually had 2 academies that year.
Right.
But part of that was the attrition we already had, and part of that was this magical extra 10 people above that 97.
So the answer there that I heard you say that earlier was that you had a pool of 10 people more to choose from. So didn't that offset the other pool that was normally gone? I mean, it seems like you had 10 to choose from to plug the gap of people that obviously didn't terminate their employment, but were not available to work that day. That to me doesn't.
It doesn't jive. So if I think I understand your question, we had a certain number of vacancies when we had the academy.
Mhm.
We hired to fill those vacancies. That brought us up to our minimum staffing. Then we hired above and beyond that,
You know,
10 additional people. So we filled the holes that we had existing, and then we hired 10 guys on top of that, on top of those holes. So we had
well, the intent was good, and my challenge with that is, we don't have an academy plan for 14, or do we?
There's not one planned, however, we did apply for a SAFER grant, and if that SAFER grant is awarded to us, then the mayor had indicated that he would probably request a first quarter budget revision to go ahead and be able to do.
Well, without interrupting you or being bold on the conversation here, we're gonna have to have additional funding sources, because if you wanna plug the gap on the overtime, and run an academy to bring your staffing numbers up to have more flexibility for the chief, you don't have enough money. And we don't have enough taxing capacity to do it. So, I mean, this is where I wanted to be, where Mr. Flynn was going. I mean, George, what else do we do here? Do we need to reopen negotiations and talk about the flexibility chief's gonna need for 3 versus 4? Or how do we get there? I don't like taking away the taxing capacity just for this department. No offense, chief, we got a big gap. And you're $88 million out of our overall budget.
So in answer to your question, if it could be done, and what we've been advocating for some time, is to just leave the mandatory staffing level at 3 per apparatus, because that's what you need
Yeah.
to operate them, and leave it at that. That does give him flexibility, and it does save quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
All right? So in an ideal world, that's exactly what we'd be advocating for. If you don't have the taxing capacity to take care of the shortfall in the overtime in 14, you know, the only other option that you have is to tax as much as you can within that capacity, and then the rest of it would just have to close down apparatus as needed, based on the overtime requirement.
We also have our reserve accounts, come on.
Well, but you're asking me what I would.
Well, I wouldn't consciously spend the reserves at first quarter budget,
No.
Patrick. So, I mean, I guess you're correct in the additional funding source, but, and I hope you guys see where I'm going here, is to talk about it before that day happens, because first quarter budget is busy. We don't have a lot of solutions. Plus, we're hearing SROs, we're hearing Juneau saying, hey, you know, we're gonna review formulas and revenue streams that are typically counted on. Which is also why I want to dial in the MLP discussion a little bit on where our known funding sources are coming from.
So,
Do you get grieved, George, when we don't, and I'm not saying you consciously do it, you're one guy that has to quickly do it, when we don't have 8 rigs out there staffed with 4 and the pressure's there to do it and we don't for some reason, have we been getting grieved on it?
Well, I think the chief's done a pretty decent job of making sure that we made that requirement. I don't know of any case where we didn't, but there may have been one, I don't know.
There have been times for very limited periods of time when we've gone without the 8 4-packs. So we've not tested that water, but I can practically guarantee you that if we did, there would be grievance.
Have you asked, and I know you had your hand up, Adam, but have you asked around inside your captains and some of the other guys that are, I hate to say the overtime users, but are you seeing guys that are gonna leave the force or the department?
You know, our numbers, we usually lose between 8 and 14 people a year. That's usually pretty consistent. It was down in 2013. Does that mean it's gonna be up in 2014?
Do you have any idea? What would your best guess be?
If I had to guess, I would say it probably will be up. Not exponentially double or anything, but it's probably gonna be more people than we lost last year.
How many have you lost so far this year with January 1 turns and stuff like that? 4 already?
I'm sorry, 3 people.
And they've given notice, or they're actually?
They're actually out the door.
Mr. Trombley?
So I went back and reviewed through the matrix report, and a couple of things that stuck out to me was, I don't know.
What page are you on, Adam?
It's page 34, Fuel Proctor matrix. And I'm curious, because obviously we are where we are, and we want to avoid this in 2014. And I don't know how much the recommendations within the matrix report are actually applicable based on current contractual obligations. I'm not entirely sure, I haven't studied that yet. But on page 34, I'll start reading about halfway down. It says, while the project team believes the standards utilized by the AFD are appropriate for metropolitan and urban areas of the municipality, the team also believes that suburban, rural, and wilderness areas should not be bound to such strict travel time standards. Therefore, the project team recommends the municipality and the AFD adopt standards based on the density of the area served by each of the stations is a single standard or require more stations and has a significant financial implication to maintain the higher staffing levels. Is it possible, and then they give a really good, graph as far as density in the stations. And one of the things the fire department's done is that they said even in these rural areas, the wilderness areas, we still need to have a response time of 8 minutes, I think it is.
Actually, in the wilderness areas, I think the rural areas, they'll give us up to 10 minutes. In the wilderness areas, they don't really have a time standard.
Okay,
as long
'cause
as you get there.
based on the report, what the report's telling is that there's a single standard for urban metropolitan, and obviously there's the allowance, but the department's policy is to have that specific. Is it possible to change that policy, which doesn't require a contractual change, but to change that policy, would that affect your staffing in Eagle River, or, not to pick on Eagle River, but would that?
Don't worry, I'll have.
Yeah, would that change your ability to manage your staffing at each station if you said, I don't need to get to that area in 8 minutes, I can get to it in 10 or 15 or 20?
The answer is no. And in some respects, we don't do it the way Matrix recommends. I think that's a fine way to look at it. But our goal is 4 minutes 90% of the time. So really.
So the entire fire service area, chief, when you're talking rural, are you outside the fire service area when you're saying that?
I'm saying the AFD standard, if you have a fire emergency, we'd like to try and get there in 4 minutes.
Anywhere in the municipality?
Anywhere in the municipality.
No, anywhere within the municipal fire service.
Fire service area, I'm sorry. A little bit of different, but essentially it's the bowl and Eagle River. What that does is, we don't make that, but we come fairly close to doing it. And essentially, we don't say we're gonna be there 100% of the time, because I know in Eagle River, there's gonna be areas, no way, I'm gonna be able to get there. So that's how we parse it out. To change to a different standard, that's fine, we can do that. I don't think it's gonna have any effect on staffing per se.
Okay, and then one other
Go ahead.
thing, Mr. Chairman.
Adam, I think the nuance is when they get to the fire or the emergency call, it's how many people have showed up to adequately handle the case, so.
Right, and I don't want to,
No, I
clearly I'm not a
think you should.
firefighter, I don't want to tell you to do your job. One of the other things that the matrix report did show is that it placed, like downtown, for example, has a much higher risk level than, say, rural Eagle River.
Right.
And so they actually break it down, parts of Anchorage, by the higher risk versus the lower risk. And so maybe the lower risk, you don't need as many people. I don't want to tell you to do your job, but that's just kind of the stuff I wanted to have that
Yeah,
conversation.
and that is all valid.
Okay, but you're telling me that making those policy changes wouldn't actually affect your overall, okay.
It would affect how I report to you and what I tell you about how the fire department's doing.
Mhm.
So, rather than just giving you that simple, hey, I try and put a fire engine there in 4 minutes 90% of the time, I would say, well, it depends on your area. If you're in downtown Anchorage, it's 4 minutes. If you're in, North Eagle River Road, it's gonna be 10 minutes. So it would change how I report, how we measure what we do.
But not a budgetary
Not
function.
a budgetary.
Okay. And one other question I have for you, when it does come to overtime, is that the report on page 33 says a total of 105 line personnel are scheduled each day to respond to emergency calls for service in the municipality. A total minimum staffing is 97. At current minimum staffing levels, AFD has 97 personnel available for immediate response to all emergencies. So does that mean that you have 105 people on the payroll that day?
Exactly.
Okay,
So
but
it's 104
as 104. So if I'm not part of the 97, I'm part of
Extra.
the extra, am I making time and a half, double time, straight time? I'm just not at a station, but I'm sitting at home
No,
waiting for.
you're we do overstaff, we have 7 extra firefighters per day. And if you were here, no, we would put you on an apparatus. We would
Okay,
get
if you were here, so is it possible that you actually don't have 140, that you actually only have that 97 for the day? Or do you always try to bump it up, so that you have your minimum setting of 97, but you always are actually paying more than 97 in a day?
Yes and no. Yes, we would be paying for more than 97 firefighters, but there would be no overtime. Everybody would be on straight time. The only time we pay overtime is if we drop below 97 bodies to put in seats for that day. Then we
So
pay-
answer it
real
another
quick,
way,
so-
sorry to interrupt, but when Adam says, when you have a good day, for example, 105 show up, but the spread between 105 and 97, you're saying nobody's on overtime in that surplus?
Exactly.
Is that true, or is that?
That's true, with exceedingly rare exceptions, like New Year's Eve.
Sure.
We put it, that made me think of something. So, yes, that's true, but you gotta realize how seldom that is. So far this year, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 days where we've had more than 97 people on duty. It just doesn't happen very frequently. And that gets to some of those other charts I put in there, on average, how many people are gone per day, either on leave.
And what's your nomenclature for that gap? We call it funded but unfilled, or, when I ran a company, there was a certain, that gap was.
Staffing overage.
Yeah, or the staffing shortage, as you refer to it, you're targeting 97, you don't always get that. But
Yes, and I don't know if it will help explain it to you a little bit or not, but the very last page in the packet I sent out is kind of one way to look at that. And what, it looks complicated when you first glance at it, but what this is really showing is at what point we are paying overtime, and at what point it's more cost effective to pay overtime versus hiring a full-time person. So what we did in 2013, these blue lines that are vertical are showing how many people were gone each of these 365 days, from the highest to the lowest. So you can see on the left, there were days, looks like 2 days, when we had 25 people gone. And then over here on the right, there were those days when we had only 5 people gone. And this little triangle you see over here is those days when we would have more people than our requisite 97. We're not paying overtime, but we would have more people on staff than we have the minimum mandatory seats to fill.
Can you speak to what's the delta between these two lines? What's driving that particularly? Is it just a combination of everything, the FSLA, time off, injury?
I should have explained that these absences, they're everything. You call in sick for the day, you go home for 12 hours, those are all the absences included in that. So you have scheduled leave, that would be included here. You go on military leave for a year, that's included here. So those are all absences. And really what this is pointing out that this line here, this horizontal red line, that's 8 persons above 97. That's the golden ratio. That's the most cost effective that we can be to fill seats. It fully acknowledges that we're gonna be spending overtime, but it's cheaper to pay overtime at a certain point.
How do you manage every shift then for that day? Did you still have the big whiteboard in your office, or?
It's done on a computer, done with telestat.
So somebody's tracking that per shift, or do you
Every
just
day.
do it?
More than every day. I mean, they're constantly watching the staff. And anytime we drop below 97, it highlights, here you have a vacancy, and that's when we start. But the only other point I'll make here is that this 8 above the 97 is a really good ratio, but you have to maintain that. As soon as we drop below those 8 extra people, then we are spending more in overtime than we would be if we had additional full-time people.
So there was, about 3 years ago, we did a study to say, what is the optimum, because we're running into this time problem. So we did a study to try to figure out what is the optimum level that would minimize overtime over time. So in other words, over a period of time, how could we minimize it? And then, if we go below that, whatever that magical number is,
exponentially, how much more does it cost us? And so when they went through and did it, and we did different models, 8 was the magic number. Because if you had more than 8, then it really was pretty expensive because of the overtime. But when you have less than 8, because of all of these unknowns, then the overtime was pretty substantial. So 8 seemed to be the right number if you can maintain it. But maintaining it is pretty difficult because of attrition, and also all these other unknowns, like the FEMLA is a big problem for them. And they have quite a few categories there where it's extended. It's the FEMLA, it's the military leave, and also workers' comp. And so those alone, you know, you can expect X number every single day out in those categories. And that does not include all the other categories that he's mentioned.
Yeah, I'll just, again, guide you guys back to that. What George is talking about is trended really well on this report that Ms. Mahoney's put together, this long vertical form. When you trend across on some of those categories, I know the print's really small, Patrick, but from 2008 to 2013, there's some pretty big drivers, which quite frankly aren't the chief's problems. You know, there is challenges, but he didn't cause them per se. I mean, insurance on the non-labor costing, if you look at that from the 08 to the 13 number. And then I'll just direct you on what this report actually shows is the bottom line. If you go to total direct cost, that's what it costs to run that department. You know, $18 million more than it was in 2008. That's a pretty scary continuation trend for us to keep up with from a revenue perspective. I did some math last night on $86 million. Let me get this right because I want to make sure that I do it right. It is $9,000 an hour to run the fire department. I think is what the math that I came up to, which is down to $2 a second. You want to put some perspective into your mind. $2 every second department's open, so that's significantly higher. Ms. Dembowski, I think you had some comments, or you raised your hand in a way that.
I do, and I just want to go back to some of the different options that have been kicked around. You know, I get what you're saying about the 3-packs. Going to 3-packs is going to save you $3.5 million a year. But that coupled with the fact that we've talked about shutting down specific rigs, tender rigs, whatnot, I want to just caution the body. When you get to some of these rural communities, Eagle River is unique. And I think you probably have the same reaction in parts of Bear Valley, but right now, we have 4 pieces of equipment, typically have 9 guys total, because typically that truck usually only has 3 guys on it, even though.
If they roll it, they don't always send the ladder truck out. So.
Well, but it's not the function of the truck, it's the guys.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you remember, when you're in a rural community like Eagle River, and it takes 15 minutes to get to Eagle River proper from Anchorage, we don't have backup, and if you're on Skyline, it's gonna take 30 minutes to get help. So that medic rig, there's a medical call comes in, you run the ambulance, you run the engine, that's automatic, right? A fire comes in, you only have 4 guys to fight a fire for 15 minutes. Best case scenario, and that's if your tenders, if they haven't pulled the tender. So I just caution the body as we start looking at, pulling rigs, or we start looking at changing from 4-packs to 3-packs, it's not about necessarily the truck, it's about the personnel on scene and how long is it gonna take backup to get there.
I think the focus is to make sure the 2014 budget is whole here. Amy.
Absolutely.
And so as we drift into solutions, I don't think anybody's jumped on that one
No,
yet.
I'm just putting it out there because I want people to understand what this means.
Yeah, and we only have 1 station in Eagle River too, guys, so beyond the volunteers, so that's the other thing.
I'm not saying it's good or bad, but there's been discussions about possibly shutting Tender 9 down, and, a tender's a water truck, usually has 1 guy on the rig, correct? And, so, you look at your high peak times, that they've done it with the Swiftwater team in Eagle River, where they stop paying, or, incentive pay, you don't pay incentive pay all year long, do you? Just over that summer period?
For Swiftwater, no,
Yeah.
it's all year.
So they're taking a more seasonal look at it. So a tender truck, granted, has value, especially in the rural areas that don't have hydrants. So you're gonna, need somebody to jump on that truck, but if they're using that tender truck more as a brush, response to brush fires, that's a different way to look at it. So it might be a seasonal thing that they're able to cut back in that area. But you always have to make sure whatever rig they're taking out, they're accounting for the fact that they might not have fire hydrants in Bear Valley.
Well, this summary sheet back on page 2 does a pretty good job
Yeah,
of talking about that. It's got the 9 in Eagle River.
So, that's just one point that I wanted to make, but the other point, going back to the overtime versus tour trades, just a comment you had made, a lot of these guys, do they want the overtime? And I can tell you from personal experience, a lot of these guys would rather, they have things come up, they're on a hunting trip, or a kid has a wrestling tournament, they'd rather call in and pick up the phone and have a guy do a true trade for them than have to call in or take a vacation day.
Can we talk about that just for a minute? This long report that has the labor and it has the men on it, this is the copy. I don't have it out electronically, but you've got a guy making $56,000 in overtime on that and on down. There's a good number of them that are well above $25,000 in overtime. So, Ms. Dombrowski, I guess I hear your point that they don't particularly want it, but Mr. Oxenham, if I trended him, I've trended him, he consistently runs over $45,000 a year in overtime.
And you might be
He
looking
must
at,
like it.
well, you have to be looking at the rank structure too, because if you have a senior captain or you have a battalion chief, there's only so many people that can work for them. So another part of this conversation
Well,
might,
I guess going back to what you said is that you didn't particularly think that the guys wanted to take the overtime, they were just happy to do it.
no,
Do you have a-
no, that's not what I said.
Oh, I didn't know it.
What I said was, there's a lot of guys, the driving force is not the overtime, it's the convenience of being able to, they'd rather take a truer trade because they can do it on the fly. They don't have to put in the time ahead of time, they can do it really quickly. So
Sure.
life events come up, and they're able to pick up the phone and get Joe to fill in for them. But the other thing that we need to look at when we're looking at overtime and tour trades is expanding the opportunity to get some of these senior ranks, more guys being able to act. So, for example, if you have, only 3 battalion chiefs per shift, and the battalion chiefs are senior captains or captains even, if we can expand the pool of engineers maybe that can act as a captain, or expand the, captains as senior captains, or on and on. I mean, that might be one opportunity to open up the tour trade realm, where it's not gonna cost the taxpayer anything, but we have these guys that are certified to be able to act up. But there has to be, I know how it works, there has to be a desire and an incentive to, and, there has to be trust, and they have to know that they're not gonna be abused and forced into those positions, but at the same time, that's just the reality of it, and Chief knows what I'm talking about. But it's an opportunity. That's why I say, this is an avenue that won't cost the taxpayer anything, but we should really look harder at it.
Well, it is, I guess, other than the fact that if you look at the overtime report by position, if you didn't do any, the guys you mentioned, the apparatus engineers, they all seem to be already heavy overtime. Is there a morale problem with the overtime, Chief? Because obviously everybody wants to kind of have time off in the summer.
I looked at our top earner there, and he did 605 hours of overtime in a year. So that's, I don't know what that turns out to, 40 hours.
Well, Ann Sigsworth actually had it this year as the battalion chief, so I think that was, well, maybe this isn't by overtime precedence. That was 56,006 for Ann.
15 weeks, yeah.
Yeah. Did you have more, Amy? Because Mr.
Nope.
Trainee wanted to chat.
Nope, I'm
We're
good.
still gonna move
I
into,
just-
we're gonna move into solutions here in about 5 minutes.
No, that's
and then
good.
we're
I
gonna
just
be
wanted
done.
to push the conversation, realize this is an opportunity to expand these types of non-monetary costs to the taxpayer. And, I know it's gonna be driven by the chief and the administration, not the assembly, but they're just ideas to consider.
Well, we've got some budget challenges for sure, so we can drive policy through budget, but we'd rather know what the best solution is. Go ahead.
Chief, got a question for you. I sent this proposal out to the unions to take 40 hours non-cashable leave because of the small problem we have with pay. What's the cost gonna be for your department for non-cashable? Because whether you call it non-cashable or not, there's still a cost with the body not being there, so you're gonna have to fill it with somebody else. Have you figured out what this is gonna cost your department if this goes forward?
I have, I won't know until it happens. That's the bottom line. I think since this memorandum went out, I've processed maybe 10, 12 leave cash in request forms. The first group that came in, because I'll be honest with you, I'm watching it like a hawk because it is potentially a huge problem for me.
It's a costly problem.
So anyway, anecdotally is all I can tell you anecdotally. 40-hour people, and they were for 40 hours of leave cash-in. There have been some come in from the 56-hour people, and it's cause for concern with how much leave is being cashed
Can you
in.
keep us updated, Chief? Because if this goes forward, that's one question we're gonna have come budget revision time, is to see what the impact's gonna be on your department
Yes,
if this goes forward.
yes. And you know, it's one of those things that I won't know until it's happened. But I'm very clear that I sign every one of those that comes through. We keep a running tally of them, keep an eye on it.
You gotta have a number.
Thank you, Chief.
Have you looked at a number? Do you have any idea what it's gonna cost? I think you do.
Well, you know,
You smile.
I mean, the trouble is, honestly, it could be anywhere from $500,000 to $3 million.
Well, that's all I'm asking.
And,
I wanna have a clue.
and it just depends on how much leave people cash in. And honestly, I've only seen maybe 12 of these come across my desk. Most of them have been in that 40-hour cash-in, but there have been a couple that are in 300-hour cash-in.
I just wanted to have some sort of idea. You know, I don't want a $10 million bill.
Yeah, and I don't want to be an alarmist, but it's cause for concern
Marilyn?
for me anyway.
Is that trend on your summary report? I thought I saw what he's talking about, the non-cashable leave costing. Did we?
It's on the short labor report, and if you go to, about halfway through, you see the overtime number, which is shaded, and immediately underneath that is the leave.
So it's on
cash.
this one here you're talking
Yes.
about?
And if you recall, I had mentioned that for 2013, that number was 2 million, and the
Yeah.
budget was 2.5 million. So I'm not sure what we budgeted for 14, do we know? For
You
leave
you
cash.
see what we're looking at, because we are
But I'm saying,
tracking.
we might have 500,000 variance there if the same kind of performance occurs that did in 13, where they were under budget by $500,000 in
Yeah.
that singular category. But we don't know.
So I guess my point on illustrating that, to not be big drama here, is it, when the chief says it can be $500,000, it can be $3 million, is that over and above what this line would represent already because of policy change?
I don't know what he,
I meant in round figures,
Total dollars.
we have told our employees that they can cash in leave. In the past, they could not cash in leave that took less than 672 hours, and to maintain 672 hours is book. That impediment is gone. If I have 672 hours, they can cash it in tomorrow. That is why there's a wide range when I'm throwing these figures out there, a very wide range. And I just eyeballed it. I thought, you know, if everybody just cashed in the minimum 40 or 56 hours, then I think it's probably in the neighborhood of $500,000. If it goes to the other extreme, it's a potential problem.
Okay. You know, by force feeding all the data, I did it on purpose, kind of. You gotta have a ramp up to the, you have to have a ramp up to the platform of data that you're gonna work with here. So my goal was now to move sort of into talk about solutions as we need to have this. I'm challenged by two things. I don't particularly like the strategy of the post-approval for the $1.7 million that's in front of us. It doesn't really mean anything. If we were gonna make a budget gain or expand a budget, we should have done it mid-December. And no offense, Ms. Mahoney, we just didn't track it. All of us didn't move that. I've only done it once in my career, it was 5 years ago. What good does it do to approve the $1.8 million item that's in front of us?
I believe it's required by code.
To do what?
If a department overruns its budget, it is required to give a supplemental. So we are being transparent and following code.
Back to Mr. Flynn's strategy, or talking about that impact. Technically, does it actually post-date the close of business on December 31st when you do the action you've got in front of us?
All these actuals are booked.
Sure.
Okay, everything is booked. It is really just, following the code, going to the assembly and requesting the supplemental for the expenditure. Patrick was talking about revenues.
I understand.
Okay, which is completely different than expenditures.
Not entirely.
No, not entirely, but the point is,
In regard to tax cap,
When you talk about the overall budget, though, I thought that was the requirement that you just stated. You have the departmental requirement, pardon for being ignorant.
By department, correct. We will likely be.
Ellie, I'm just not, I've only faced it once before, so I'm unclear as
And
if
Mr.
it's.
Chairman, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be
No,
disrespectful.
explain it to the body.
But, what Ms. Mahoney's saying is exactly right. You know, if you fall short, the code requires that we increase the budget for a department. And since I have the floor, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Since I raised my hand some time ago.
That's
Okay.
all right.
So my question is, in this document, AFD 2013 budget, the last line says attempted a fund balance draw in June. So does this mean that you asked the administration for an increase because you anticipated a shortfall for overtime back in June? And what's the response? Well,
I thought the response was going well, but it never came to fruition. We never got that.
I'd like to respond to that. Okay, so
Pardon?
I'd like to respond to
Yeah,
that.
please do.
The mayor had approved certain apparatus to be open for a short period of time. And the decision was that we would continue to track the budget and see if the department could make up the additional overtime for that period of time associated with Tender 9. What happened was on September 27th, additionally, I had one of my budget analysts query all of the departments and provide forecasts for year-end expenditures by every single department. And at that time, the fire department predicted a year-end forecast of about $200,000 deficit. So based on that information, in the fourth quarter, I disapproved PACE items of about up to $500,000 to accommodate that known reduction. Then what happened was, we continued on, and the leave cash-in amount of $2 million was booked in January, and that was not taken into consideration in the forecast that was provided to me. So, it's really a training issue in regard to trying to work with the budget analyst and the fire department to get them to understand some of those year-end expenditures.
As it relates to 2014, I don't want to be sitting here a year from now doing the same thing.
So what we're going to do for 14 is in 2013, I required that the fire department start accruing for holiday cash-in because that was another item. And now what we'll do for 14 is require them to accrue that item as well as this leave cash-in so that we know every single month where we will be and we won't have this surprise at the end of the year. And that way we won't have to rely on people remembering numbers, but it will be actually recorded. And then we'll reverse rebook at the end of the year, which will have an impact that it should be significantly less.
Yeah, and to that degree, some of the other driving factors, Mr. Vacalis, can you come up with sort of a little report that talks to us about how you were able to staff the department and when you weren't, meaning, hey, we got military leave, new deployments. I mean, I would want to know that there's trends that we perhaps have some, not influence over, but at least awareness that it's happening to either trigger an academy because it looks like a permanent trend, whether it be workman's comp or time off request, because we probably obviously aren't staffing to give the chief the flexibility that he needs. And I guess I thought we did, I thought we had intentions to. I thought we were at the number to provide the chief to select 20 people last year at the academy level. Did we fund, do you remember what we funded?
We funded $800,000 for the academy for 2013.
And we used about half of it then, is that?
Well, essentially, we used it all partly in wages. That's at 300,000 in wages and the rest in equipment.
I just got here, so I saw this one yesterday, so I don't know if that's true, but. Okay, back to solutions now. And again, the code, and I don't want to beat that one up as well. I'll go back and refresh my memory. I thought we had certainly the code requirement when revenues weren't sufficient to keep up with expenses. Is that where we went as a technical term? Did we?
No, I mean,
Okay.
we submitted the request for the additional supplemental based on the approved budget for that department. It did not have anything to do with revenues.
Okay, but as far as you're concerned, we didn't have a revenue, because we've been there before too as a municipality where we had exceeded our known revenues and we were consciously going into fund balance in December. And so.
Yes, that is not the situation this year in
All
regard
right.
to revenues. Revenues, we will likely collect more than what we had planned, probably a couple million.
Okay, so, because I'm ignorant here, when we approve that 1.7 million, which we probably need to, what actually does that do to 2014's budget numbers, as Mr. Flynn's logic?
Yeah, it does nothing to
Okay.
2014.
We paid salaries, we paid the bills, you backed off as much non-labor expending as you could, booked it in January, all the other stuff. Okay, chief, what do we do? What do you want us to do? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
I think Adam had his hand up too, Mr. Chairman. Okay, Ms. Mahoney, what caught my mind here in my numbers and your explanation of from September to the end of the year, you said that the leave cash-in wasn't somehow or another calculated, so it was like a budget analyst not communicating clearly as to what it was. That's what I heard.
Yeah, the budget analyst did not incorporate the leave cash-in in the year-end expenditure.
The entire amount of the year or just for that last quarter?
I don't know, but I do know that even in the middle of December, when Chris and I were talking about it, we didn't think that there was gonna be a problem, but what had happened was the leave cash-in was not incorporated in the numbers, so
For the entire year or just for that last quarter?
I think it's for the entire year.
Okay. That could be problematic, and I'm not
I
sure.
know,
where
that's
they
the
are.
reason why I said we're gonna start accruing it every single month,
Sure.
because then that way this won't happen again.
Because I'm looking at this from a practical standpoint of budgeting, and not the numbers person you are, but it seems to me that we budgeted pretty consistent on leave cash-in. There was a little anomaly, a spike of about $400,000 in difference, not quite, maybe right around, from the last year, 2012. But previously, it's been running somewhere around the 1.5 million. Is that a fair statement?
Mhm.
So I'm looking at a difference of about $500,000.
Yeah.
I go back to the overtime, and I'm troubled by the fact that we're looking at 2.4, and let's say the academy brought another 300, 400, we're still talking 2.7, and yet I don't see a year anywhere where there's overtime anywhere near that since 2008, 2009. And so my concern is, if we're approving budgets, actual budgets as close as we possibly can, that will balance at the end of the year, without having to go to fund balance, or without having to cut somewhere else to cover the cost, is that we get to an actual budgeting, and this is the part that has been problematic for me since I've been in this body, Mr. Chairman. It's a
Well-
statement you don't need to reply.
We try, Paul, I mean, I work at it hard as well, all the numbers are there, it's a big budget.
The numbers are there, Mr. Chairman.
Well, they are there, and so when you say that the overtime has never been there, on this gray sheet, Ms. Mahoney, about midway down, you talk about total overtime trend. 2008, 2009 at 1.1 million. Now, 3 million in 10, 11 is 4.1, 3.3, you see the line I'm looking at?
So why did we budget 2.4, Mr. Chairman, is what I'm asking. Why did we budget 2.4 if we're, at 3 years prior, we're averaging well above that? My point.
I will
We
say
wouldn't be here at $2 million problem.
I think we approved the budget unanimously too, so, I mean,
I
I'm
think that
taking
goes against-
responsibility for that, Mr. Holman, I do that as well, there's no question.
My point, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, is that why are we not getting information, data that can substantiate why that number is what it is? 2.4 million, somebody had to see that we can get by with 2.4 million, and we blew it.
Sure, well, and I'm not here to argue with you by any means, we do budget actual tracking now, we get those reports, even though they're a month late.
That's right.
We were over our budget in October before we approved the budget, so
So why not a third quarter fund balance?
absolutely, no question about it, and if the chief asked for one, great, but my point was, in October, if you'll go back to that budget actual report, which we get timely to the assembly, we were already over the 2014 number. So this is the cognizant help that I need from the body to say, those are why we get those reports, so we can look forward. And we should have had a different discussion. We're having it now, it's just now the end of January.
I get it.
I want to get this out front so that we don't have a bigger challenge come March or April. So back to solutions. Who's got the floor on that? Mr. Trump?
I just want to talk about solutions and back to the matrix report, for those who have it, page 118, page 119. Aurora, Colorado, Boise, Colorado Springs, Glendale, Spokane, all have more working fires, more number of EMS calls, more EMS calls per 1,000 than
Your-
Anchorage.
Mr. Trumley, your report's different than the one I have, but it's, We'll
then-
get there, it's
sure.
just, the report's broken down into 2 pages, I don't go about
Okay.
90, or
Sorry.
into 2 chapters, so.
Okay, well anyways, all of them have increased. All of them, their budget expenditures are anywhere from $50 to $40 million less than Anchorage's. Some of them, like Boise, Idaho, for example, have more fire stations than we do. They have less personnel than we do, but they have more working fires, more EMS calls. They also require three packs as opposed to 4. Those are the numbers provided from the matrix report. So what I'm wondering is that, what do those fire departments do that we don't? What can we do policy-wise outside of contractual obligations? The 3 to 4 pack thing, that's a non-issue. It is what it is, unless it's reopened and it's renegotiated. But I have no control over that anyways. So what do they do that we can do? There's gotta be a reason why it's $50 million less.
I'm not that familiar with the specifics on that department to answer what are the unique differences between the two of us.
Well, Mr. Steele, they're not smaller departments, they actually have more fire stations than we do, so that's what I'm wondering.
I think it relates to the comparison of salaries, okay? I think
Is
there
it,
have been.
so it's completely driven by salary?
I'm not saying completely driven by salaries, but, I mean, there have been reports that have indicated that the firefighters here are some of the highest paid firefighters in the country. And so when you have a higher salary base, and then you have the overtime on top of that higher base, you've got a significant compounding in just your compensation when you compare to an organization like that.
Okay, so, Chief, would you agree with that, in the sense that there's not really a policy change that you can make? Or how can we better operate the department? Is it solely just increase our budget and we'll be fine? Is that the answer?
In broad terms, I mean, I'm not sure how to, I'm not that familiar with Aurora, Colorado, so
Sure.
I don't know how, I don't know what magic they're working down there to end up where they're at versus compared to where we are. If I know, trust me, if I knew of a policy statement or change that I could make that would have an impact on this problem, I'd be all for making it. If there was a solution out there that was within my purview to do, I would be certainly open to it, but I don't know what it is.
So at the end of the day, what you're telling us is that it's increase my budget, that's the answer. And if that's the answer, that's.
Yeah,
that's the
I
answer.
think
We're not
that is the
criticizing
answer,
you.
that we have the staffing we have the staffing model that we have the department that we have. And it is gonna cost a certain amount of money to run this staffing model and run this department that we have. And you can't really, you can't say, I'm gonna give you half your budget and keep everything the same. That's why I'm here. It just doesn't, it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way for me. But I'm not trying to be Austin, really. If there was something I could say, like, we're gonna do X or Y, and that's gonna save us millions of dollars, I would do it. But I don't know what it is.
Ms. Moore, do you agree with that? I mean, as a CFO, are there things, numbers that you see that are different? Maybe that's a bad question to ask, put you on the spot.
Well, she's got a bigger overall scope to the answer. She's gonna run all the departments from a
Right.
fiscal perspective, so I don't know if it's unfair or not. Clearly we need fiscal planning, and we're trying to do some today, as much as we can, because it's important to us too.
Is there a fiscal thing that you see that we can do differently?
Okay, so, operationally, sure, I have ideas. I have ideas about the fire department, but that's really not my area of expertise. In regard to the overall budget, the solution I suggest for this would be, we will likely have some fund balance available in the end of 2013 that we can use to fund this for just 1 year, to get us to the point where the contract is renegotiated. If we can renegotiate the contract at the end of this year to remove the 3 packs, we have 5 million in savings. That could be something that is sustainable, because this year we can get through it because of fund balance, okay? There's no doubt we can do it, but it's not sustainable, and it does not make good fiscal sense to use one-time funding for sustainable costs.
in the three-pack discussion, and George, you know this, it frees up about 24 people, then you're talking one guy times 3 shifts, that's 24 men. The chief has a little bit more flexibility before he's up against the unions. I got it, Amy. Just-
Yeah, it's 1 per 3 times 8, yes.
And that's a fair amount of labor flexibility that you, go ahead.
Ms. Mahoney, you said you expect there will be 2013 fund balance that can bridge the gap for this 1 year. What do you anticipate the fund balance to be?
But if you recall, at the last assembly meeting, you approved $3.5 million. A large portion of that will drop to fund balance. You also approved $1 million, and so that was for the special assessment extra money we found. So with the SAP money we found, some of that we could use for this. Also, we did collect additional revenues. So we're still putting together all the numbers and closing the books, but, you know, I think we will have 5 million probably or so.
Okay, so that was my thing. I wanted to
I
make
mean,
sure it was
you
more
know,
than
plus
what
or
we had
minus
been.
5 on each end.
That brings us back to 0.
Can I ask a question off topic? Ms. Mahoney, the ML&P dividend was paid to the municipality side, you know, the child paid the parent, so to speak, in that. Did we borrow
The
money?
subsidiary paid the share.
We own the company.
Okay.
Did the enterprise borrow the money to pay the dividend?
No.
Okay. They paid it out of cash.
Yeah.
Okay.
Commercial paper is what we
Yeah.
borrow, but that can only be used for capital
Okay.
expenditures. And that's the requirements of those programs.
Sure. Okay. Well, it puts us on the spot here, guys, because we need to be budget efficient in every other department. If we're hearing this news, guys, my challenge is we're gonna hear the same thing from another department here pretty soon. We may hear from the police, they had increased, people left the department, I understand, a little bit greater pace. And we pretty solid in all the other departments based on the last report that I saw. You gave the assembly saying we came in pretty solid budget to actuals. So we may not hear that, but you know, all this, Mr. Holm, as you illustrated, is sort of a work in progress. And it's by no means a guess, but we have to get sharp again at the first quarter budget to make sure we're hitting this right. And
Every single department came in under budget.
and I meant to
except for
say
the
that
fire
clearly.
department. And so I think out of 24 departments that were
Very nice.
managing, on an overall basis, we did quite well.
Sure, no question. And I didn't mean to say it any less than that. That's not an easy task by any means, but a hiccup in revenue, a change in Juno, you know, we could see other factors inside 2014 that causes some grief. All being said, I don't like the reliance on fund balance. I like to have that cushion in there for days that are rainy, that aren't so good. But Mr. Steele, did you wave? I know Amy did. Did you have anything to add to the conversation?
Well, it seems to me we knew something at budget time in terms of what the trends were, and we should have done a better job of recognizing that budget was. That's, if we just ignore it, then we run into these kind of problems. And
I don't know if we ignored it. I take the heat for that. There's no question. I can put it in front of you guys. I can't make you guys read it. But it was close, because when we did November, mid-November before Thanksgiving, my stomach was rumbling. I could feel it. And it was a hard thing to not bring up because we were globally talking about other budgets.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I think that's a little unfair. Did I read my budget? Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm taking information that I'm getting from the administration who prepared and presented the budget. Do I know specifically what happened? Heck, they didn't even know from their own budget analyst. They couldn't even track it in their own office. So
In
to be
terms of
fair
cash
here,
relief, yes.
to be fair here, we get a budget number that we're relying on from the administration, that 2.4 or 2.7 for the year is enough. And it wasn't, and we weren't told. And we didn't make the reparations towards the last quarter of 2013 because we missed it. Somehow we missed it. So that's the statement. Now, as far as going to the cap, may have to this year. Am I comfortable with it? Do I like it? No. But sometimes we have to do what we have to do to make sure the bill's paid.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to belabor it. I mean, the continuation budget concept inside our big budget book, Paul does list all of that, and the administration's pretty clear, the reports they give us. I made it more of an observation to myself, because that's what I try to focus on particularly. I didn't say you were culpable or anything like that. It's
No,
just
we're all responsible. It's, to say we didn't read our budget or didn't catch this.
I didn't.
I
I'll
caught the
qualify.
budget that they requested, and we approved what they requested. And we did the same thing for 2014. And if we come to the problem, I expect to hear the facts that, hey, we're having a problem, so we can find a solution.
We're having that factual discussion today, and we need to do something in 14, Paul. So I don't know what else to say today to do that, but we can't just walk out of here and approve a 1.7 million. We've got to do it.
And by the way, the numbers as of today are 1.4. Okay, so the 1.7.
This is non-labor adjustments. You know your total labor cost because your payroll's closed, so you're talking about your non-labor stuff. And
Right, and I mean, there's still a few encumbrances left in that department that need to be reversed, but as of today, it's 1,471 is the deficit.
do you plan to adjust that for what we do more real time at our next assembly meeting?
We wrote it as a not to exceed, so that we wouldn't have to put forward
Sure.
another document.
Well, it's a technicality. My only concern there is, are you pushing stuff into 2014, like, deferred computer buys and all that stuff that you're gonna have anyhow?
No, I mean, we follow GAAP, generally accepted accounting
I get it.
principles, and whatever has been spent in 13 is what is.
Yeah. It wasn't an accusation, it was just, if we're just kicking the can down the road. Go ahead, Ellen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comment, but I also appreciate Mr. Honeman's comment too, and I don't have to prove anything to any of you, but, budgeting is one of my expertise, and I'm really proud of that. And I read my materials, but one of the things that I think we may need to do, and I'm not criticizing you, Mr. Chairman, is as a body, if we're gonna review documents when we receive them from the administration, that we probably should have more budget and finance committee meetings to allow us to do that, committee, and also if others, something we can attend. And I think that will help us a little bit,
Yeah.
if we did that.
The challenge with
Thank
that
you.
is that the May report, the June report, they don't really tell us much. The real meat of the work comes around, and it's a good suggestion, but the real meat of the discussion starts to gel when those reports mean much. Just same with the revenue trends. We don't even actually see a revenue trend report until June. So the idea that somehow we know more now doesn't really muster. A lot happens in October. By then, we're in the final budget discussions and meeting by the whole anyhow. So I take that, but I don't know how else to clarify the process. I think when you ask a question in administration, I found they give you an answer. I always liked the departmental stuff. Ms. Dombrowski on BAC, remember we had those one-on-ones with that. Do we have other, it's a long ways away till that, the first quarter discussions.
Can I follow up on
Ms.
that?
Gray Jackson says, if you want to flesh it out at the committee level, all that's good, but.
I'm not looking for more meetings, but I'm just saying that I think that the Budget and Finance Committee meeting is one of the most powerful, if you will, committees of the Assembly, next to the Audit Committee, because after all, we do appropriate the funds for this municipality of Anchorage. And so I think it would be helpful, again, I'm not looking for more meetings, but
Sure.
I think it would be helpful if, we did meet more often than we do, to discuss these matters gradually, and not all of a sudden we got this issue.
Sure.
And here we are.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I don't have any trouble yielding the chair either to the conversation, so. Have at it. Ms. Dombrowski?
I just have one more follow-up.
No, there's plenty of time. We're starting to revisit the same
Yeah,
thing.
well,
As
this is
Chris
a new
Christian say, we're coming
this is
full
a new
circle here.
issue regarding the fire department. Can you tell us where we are and improvements we've made as far as AFD collections? Are we on track there? I know a few months
Yeah,
ago,
thanks, Becky.
I was very concerned, and anecdotally, I've heard that we've made improvements, but I'd like to know, because that was something I was really concerned about.
Yeah.
Revenues exceeded budget for AFD in total.
For AFD in total. So that hiccup we had with the new contractor has been resolved?
They're at about 70% collection, which is
2% below where the old one was.
below where the old one is.
But close.
We're paying, essentially it comes down, we're paying less for that collection. So that's why the end result is we're doing pretty well as far as revenue.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Thanks. I think we're done. Thanks for the facts and disclosure. I think we have what we need. Chief, thanks for your report and straight up speak. Hope you got that from us. We'll try to sort through it some more.
Thank you.
we'll close it out. Thank you.